Confined to a hospital bed and sedated, Adeline overheard her son and daughter-in-law planning her funeral. She didn't die. She woke up, and her revenge was rewriting her final song and erasing their names from her entire legacy. Before continuing, write where you are from or what time it is. I woke up to them choosing my coffin. That was the verdict. Not the panic of the machines or the sterile smell of the hospital, but the sound of my son, Adeline Krenshaw, and his wife, Veronica, standing on the other side of the privacy curtain, debating floral arrangements. I was still alive. My heart was still beating strong beneath all that silence. They had extended my hospital stay. They told the doctors I was declining. They were planning to bury me before I even opened my eyes. I was 74 years old, Adeline Krenshaw, a retired seamstress, and they were choosing orchids. Veronica thought lilies were too plain. The curtain between us was flimsy, hospital-issue vinyl that stopped no sound. My body was tired, heavy with the sedative they'd given me to keep me comfortable, but my ears worked just fine. I heard Julian mumble something about the pricing. I had raised that boy after his father passed when Julian was barely 12. I hemmed skirts and baked cornbread, doing whatever I had to do. I gave him my whole life in pieces. Now he was counting the pieces for my funeral. This entire nightmare started on a Thursday morning, still dark outside. I woke up early to fast for the church's week-long prayer revival. The fasting used to be easy, but that day, my fingers tingled while I was ironing my white blouse. I should have stopped, taken a sip of juice, a cracker. I didn't. The next thing I knew, fluorescent lights burned above me, and a tube was in my arm. Blood sugar drop, the nurse said. I told them I just needed food. Everything changed when Julian and Veronica walked through the door. Julian acted concerned at first, rubbing my arm like I was already gone. But then he leaned close to the nurses and whispered. He thought I couldn't hear, but his voice carried. Veronica was worse. She clutched her handbag like she was attending a business meeting. She's been repeating herself, forgetting dates, Veronica told the doctor, her voice flat. We think this has been building for some time. I wanted to shout no. My tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth from the sedative. I shook my head hard, but the room was spinning. They didn't see it, or they didn't want to. By the next day, I was no longer a patient recovering from a fainting spell. I was a case file. Someone scribbled memory observation on my chart. They asked me questions I didn't understand. Do you know who the president is? Do you feel safe at home? I wanted to yell, yes, of course I do. But they only gave me soup and silence. Julian stopped visiting during the day. Veronica stayed. She would take calls just outside the door, speaking in hushed tones. I heard her scheduling a meeting with the funeral home. Lavender and gold, she said. Something soft, not too depressing. I saw the color swatches later, literal swatches she pulled from her purse and held to the light. She asked if she could reserve the church reception hall for a weekend in November. Just in case, she told them. Just in case I didn't wake up in time for my own memorial. I was supposed to fade away. That was the plan. Julian sent an email to my insurance provider claiming I was experiencing cognitive failure. I heard a nurse reading his message aloud during a shift change. Son says she's not been lucid at home. Wants to explore permanent placement, the nurse read. I wasn't even out of the hospital, and they were packaging me for storage. My chest went tight. I couldn't move. I squeezed my eyes shut. Then Noah came. My baby, my grandson. He wasn't supposed to visit after hours, but he slipped in. His face was pale and serious. He held my hand. I'm here, Grandma, he whispered. I know what they're doing. I saw the emails. My heart hammered against my ribs. I didn't have the strength to talk, but I squeezed his fingers as tight as I could to show him I was still in here, still listening, still watching. He told me he was going to fix it. I wanted to tell him no, that it wasn't his job, but I didn't want him to stop believing he could save me. The feeling that sat behind my chest was a sharp, bitter pain. I remembered Julian at 5 years old, clinging to my dress at the bus stop. Now the boy I raised would rather bury me with orchids than ask if I was ready to go. That night, I watched the shadows crawl across the ceiling. I listened to the machines beep and the janitor's mop wheels squeak, and then I heard Veronica's voice just outside the door. It would be easier for everyone if we made arrangements now. I wasn't supposed to hear that, but I did. And in that moment, I knew I had a choice. I could fade away like they wanted, or I could fight back with whatever strength I had left. I wasn't leaving this earth on their terms, not without a witness, and certainly not while I was still breathing. I squeezed his fingers as tight as I could, but the only person who knew I was awake was a frightened boy. Veronica's voice cut through the sterile air. Well, can we at least keep her on observation for another week, just until the power of attorney clears? That was the microclock. She wasn't just planning my funeral. She was stalling, waiting for the forged paperwork to clear. Julian had submitted documents claiming I'd given him full medical authority. Once that cleared, they could move me wherever they pleased. I might never see my own kitchen window again. My jaw locked. Later that day, a nurse came in with a fresh sedative. My body grew heavy again. She held up the needle, but then she hesitated. She looked me right in the eye. I blinked once. Then I forced a second, slower blink. The nurse's name was Harper. Middle-aged, sharp, and soft-spoken. She saw the trouble as clearly as a pastor sees a liar in the sanctuary. She lowered the syringe. She sat beside my bed. "You're not crazy," she whispered, barely above a hum. "And you don't look anywhere near ready for a funeral." She squeezed my hand, a quick, firm pulse of real human connection, and then she walked out. That small gesture saved my life. Veronica returned the next morning, breezy and polished, like a woman stepping into her inheritance. She adjusted the flowers on the windowsill and told Nurse Harper she needed to speak with the attending physician about next steps. When Veronica stepped out, I knew my chance was now. My fear had become a bitter, hard urgency. I forced the words out, gravel in my throat. "Call Simone Fairchild," I whispered to the nurse. "Who is that?" Nurse Harper asked. "My attorney," I rasped. "And don't tell my son," I asked. She nodded and left. I didn't know if she'd really do it. I held my breath, listening to the machines beep. This felt like a full-body risk. 5 hours later, Attorney Sinclair was standing in my doorway. She didn't speak to me first. She spoke to Dr. Reed, then the hospital administrator, and then to Veronica, who returned from the cafeteria with a cup of tea and a mouthful of false surprise. "Oh, I didn't know Attorney Sinclair was coming," Veronica said. Sinclair didn't bother with a response. She simply handed Veronica a thick linen envelope. Her face was granite. "Cease and desist," Sinclair stated, her voice sharp and final. "You have no authority over Adeline's medical decisions. I have documentation dated 2 months ago, signed, witnessed, and notarized." Veronica's lips parted, her polished composure cracking. "Well, Julian," Sinclair cut her off. "Julian is not here, and even if he were, he doesn't have a say. This document supersedes any subsequent paperwork." Veronica's face froze. She looked like a gambler who had bet the house and lost everything but her shoes. She gripped the envelope, turning the paper white under her knuckles. That night, Dr. Reed came in. "You're stable," he said, lucid, and frankly, We should have let you go 2 days ago. Nurse Harper wheeled me down to the lobby herself. She asked if I had someone to stay with. Yes, I said, looking right at her. I have a lawyer. She smiled wide at that. Well, now I know you're just fine. Sinclair drove me straight to her colonial house, quiet and secluded. She helped me settle into the guest room, a place full of gentle light. They'd been planning this for months, Sinclair said, laying out the documents on the table. Real estate evaluations, quiet calls to care facilities, a scheduled meeting with the funeral director. Veronica's smile cracked as Sinclair handed her the envelope, but I knew she was already planning her next move. Sinclair's guest room felt safer than my own home. The papers proved my son and his wife weren't just reacting to a fainting spell. This was an operation. Adeline. Sinclair paused, letting the silence hang heavy. They even picked out the music. What song? I asked. My voice felt steadier now. Amazing Grace, Sinclair said. The gospel version. Veronica emailed the organist last week. I sat with that. They had chosen my final song before God even had the chance to call me home. Then Sinclair leaned forward and opened a second folder. There's more. Inside were printed screenshots and emails, digital messages forwarded by my grandson, Noah Krenshaw. He had sent everything to Sinclair directly. Every time Veronica badmouthed me, every plan she laid out as if I were already in the ground. Noah had seen it all. My hands trembled as I held those papers. Not from fear, but from the cold realization that the child I raised had allowed his wife to turn him into my undertaker. He hadn't even brought a shovel. He just let her do the digging and handed her the map. This pain was deeper than any hospital tube. I set the folder down. I took a deep breath. I looked Sinclair straight in the eye, my resolve solidified. Get me my will, I said. We're going to rewrite everything. Sinclair nodded, already pulling out her pen. And one more thing, I added. Leave Noah in. Make him my emergency contact. He was the only one who held my hand. Sinclair smiled. Consider it done. We worked around the clock. I removed Julian completely. Not a dollar, not a chair, not a photograph. I added the local women's shelter as the primary beneficiary of my estate. They would do more good with my house than anyone else. Then I added a contingency clause. If any harm came to me under suspicious or accelerated circumstances, everything would be placed in a trust under Noah's name. Sinclair would be the executive. Julian wouldn't even be allowed to contest it. Veronica's name wasn't needed. We made copies, sent them to the county clerk, and filed one with the courthouse. Sinclair had every angle covered. I hadn't felt this safe in years. Then came the certified letter, delivered right to Sinclair's front porch. Julian's handwriting, sloppy and angry. Mama, I don't know what Sinclair's telling you, but we're just trying to help. You need rest? Veronica's been stressed trying to take care of everything. Please stop acting like we're the enemy. I read it twice. Then I laughed. He still didn't realize who he'd married or what she'd done. The paperwork was filed and certified, and I was going home, but not to my house. Noah texted Sinclair the next morning. He was the most important link in my chain now. Veronica is asking questions. She noticed the discharge, suspicious, restless, trying to track where Grandma is staying. He kept his answers short, neutral. She's different now, he wrote. She's pushing Dad hard, talking about lawsuits, about making you look unfit. I told Sinclair it was time. I want to go home. Sinclair raised an eyebrow. You sure? I nodded. They need to see me standing. Sinclair made the arrangements. Nurse Harper even offered to stop by and check on me once a week. Women like Mrs. Krenshaw don't come around often. I smiled at that. I went back to my house on a Tuesday afternoon. The garden was dry, the sun shining. My porch swing creaked, but the air was too still. The house felt like it had been holding its breath. Inside, the walls smelled like fresh paint. The guest room had new curtains. My dining table was gone, replaced with a sleek glass thing I'd never seen before. Veronica had been redecorating, claiming space that wasn't hers. The sight of it was a sharp sensory jolt. I opened my bedroom door and found a half-empty suitcase on the floor. My dresses were folded like hotel linens. My jewelry box was open. I didn't get angry. I got quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath the surface like water just before it boils. Sinclair joined me later that evening. Noah showed up too, holding a box of my favorite shortbread cookies and a face full of guilt. "Grandma," he said, eyes brimming. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to go against Dad, but I couldn't let them do this to you. I touched his cheek. "You did exactly what you were supposed to, baby." We spent the night preparing. Sinclair explained everything to Noah. The new will, the shelter clause, the trust in his name. "You're her protection now," Sinclair said, "legally and spiritually." Noah nodded, standing a little taller. We agreed not to say anything until they showed up. But something told me they'd come soon. Veronica was too controlling. Julian didn't know how to stop anything once it was already moving. I laid out my Sunday dress that night, not for service, for battle. The next morning, the doorbell rang. I didn't move. Noah peeked through the curtain. "It's them," he said. I smoothed my dress, walked to the door, and opened it, like I owned the ground they were standing on. Julian held a folder. Veronica gripped her handbag like it was armor. I knew they hadn't come to apologize. Veronica had that look again. Her eyes did a quick scan of the living room behind me, and I could already see her disappointment. My chest was rising. My voice hadn't failed. I was still standing, and that ruined the script she had planned. Julian tried to play warm. "Mama," he said, "we just came by to check on you." I stood tall in the doorway. "You mean concerned that I got out before you could finish rewriting my life?" He blinked like a child who just touched a hot stove. Julian blinked, shocked by my direct question. Veronica stepped forward, plastering on a smile. Her voice was syrup, too sweet to trust. "We didn't mean to upset you, Adeline. We were just trying to help during a difficult time." I leaned slightly toward her. "You don't help people by planning their funeral behind their back." Her smile cracked just a little. Her eyes dropped. Then Attorney Sinclair appeared behind me. "Welcome, Mr. Krenshaw," she said. "I'm here as Mrs. Crenshaw's legal counsel. If you're here to speak about her care, I suggest you speak to me directly." Veronica's lips parted. She wasn't expecting Sinclair. Julian took a breath and looked at the folder. "I brought copies of some forms we submitted. Healthcare proxy. Insurance adjustments." Sinclair cut him off. "Those documents were submitted fraudulently. We have voice recordings, emails, and third-party statements proving coercion. If you push this further, I will press charges." Julian hesitated. "Mama," he said softer now. "I didn't know we thought." I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. "You thought I was slipping," I said. "You thought you could move in while I was still under sedation. You thought you could gut my home and host a slideshow about my life, like I wasn't still living it." I took another step forward. "You thought wrong." Julian looked down, ashamed. Veronica didn't flinch. "And you," I said. "You picked out a color palette for my coffin. You wouldn't have wanted something gloomy." Julian turned to her then. "Wait, what?" Veronica blinked. "I told you I just wanted to be prepared, just in case." Sinclair stepped in between them. "Let me be perfectly clear. You both attempted to place Mrs. Krenshaw in a care facility without legal authority. You coordinated with the funeral home. You requested information about end-of-life care. And you tried to forge medical authority through a fake power of attorney. That's elder abuse, and it's a felony. Julian paled. Veronica turned away, muttering. Sinclair pulled a second envelope. This is a legal cease and desist. She handed the next one to Veronica. And this is a notarized witness statement from a nurse at the hospital who overheard you asking about euthanasia protocols. Veronica's jaw dropped. Her voice cracked. I never said that. You asked how long she could be kept in a medically sedated state, Sinclair countered, and whether doctors had any compassionate options if the family was ready to say goodbye. That nurse wrote it all down. Julian looked at Veronica like he didn't recognize the woman he married. They left soon after. Veronica walked fast, her heels tapping down my porch. Julian lingered. I saw shame flicker in his eyes. I closed the door gently behind them. I turned to Noah. You did good, I told him. You were brave. He sat on the last step and exhaled hard. They were going to take everything, Grandma. I nodded, but not today. That night, after dinner, I walked to the closet. Inside were boxes. One had slideshow, scrolled on the front. Inside were printed photographs of me, a copy of my wedding photo, a photo of me holding Julian. A USB stick was taped to the top flap. Noah sat beside me as I plugged it into Sinclair's laptop. Celebrating the life of Adeline Krenshaw faded in. Amazing Grace played softly. Then came the slides. The caption flashed, Beloved matriarch, faithful servant, gone too soon. They made this while you were still in the hospital, Noah whispered. I nodded. They had it already. All they needed was a reason to press play. I closed the laptop. I walked to the porch, sat on the swing. I closed the door on my son and my daughter-in-law, knowing the battle for my life was only just beginning. Peace never lasts, especially not the kind you steal back from a greedy woman. I sat on the porch swing that night, feeling the chill of the coming November, knowing my silence wouldn't hold. My triumph on the doorstep was too clean. Veronica wouldn't tolerate a loss she couldn't spin. The blow landed 3 days later. A courier arrived at Sinclair's office, not my home. He delivered a heavy stack of papers. Sinclair called me instantly, her voice tight. She filed a countersuit, Sinclair stated. Not for the will, not yet. She's challenging your competency. My pulse spiked. This was the escalation. Private stakes, the hospital, had climbed to financial legal. Veronica was leveraging Julian's fraudulent POA attempt, and Dr. Reed's initial memory observation scribbled to claim I was unfit to manage my affairs. They wanted the house placed under temporary guardianship, which meant Veronica's control. She's also claiming defamation and emotional distress, Sinclair added. She says your confrontation on the porch with the nurse's statement caused her public harm. The sheer audacity of it left me cold, not angry. She wants to play the victim. Sinclair laid out the plan. We can fight this in court, but it will take months, and she will leverage every delay. We need to prove you are visibly lucid. Lucid? The word tasted metallic. I need you to show up, Adeline, Sinclair said. Go to the market. Go to the church. Speak with the neighbors. Let them see you standing and moving. This was the social stakes rung. I had to step out of the quiet safety of my house and into the noise of the world Veronica was trying to poison. The risk was public humiliation. I chose Sunday service. I dressed in my best suit, the one I used to wear for funerals, and drove myself to Morning Star Baptist. Julian and Veronica were nowhere in sight. They always sat near the back, hiding their bad behavior behind hymns. The church hummed. I walked down the aisle, slower than usual, but with my chin high. The movement itself was a statement. My presence was an action. After the service, I moved to the courtyard. I saw Mrs. Hayes, a woman who baked with me for church events, glancing at me with worry. Veronica must have been whispering. I walked right up to Mrs. Hayes. My choice was decisive. "Martha," I said, "I need to know your recipe for the cornbread. I'm cooking for the women's shelter next week." Mrs. Hayes's eyes widened. She had seen through Veronica's lies. "Adeline, honey, I heard you were resting." "I was," I agreed. I allowed a sliver of vulnerability. "But I'm back now. The house is a mess. Veronica was kind enough to redecorate the dining room while I was away. But now the whole kitchen feels wrong. I need that cornbread recipe to set things right." The microcost was revealing the internal chaos, but the action, the recipe, the shelter, the visible knowledge of the redecorating proved I wasn't just lucid, I was engaged. "Oh, Adeline," Mrs. Hayes said, her shoulder falling slightly in relief. "That woman, she asked about you, said you were confused." "I signed the new will this week," I said simply, allowing a flash of rhetorical emphasis. "I signed it with both hands. I am not confused about my legacy." Mrs. Hayes nodded, conviction hardening her face. She pulled me close. "I'll drop off the recipe and a pan of cornbread tomorrow. You focus on the rest." I had won the first round of the social fight, but the larger conflict remained. That evening, Sinclair came over. "The judge asked for evidence of your state of mind. We're sending them Noah's emails, of course. But that slideshow—" I walked to the closet and pulled out the box marked slideshow. The USB stick was still taped to the top flap. "We'll use it," I said, "but not the way Veronica planned." We watched the slideshow together. The screen lit up. Celebrating the life of Adeline Krenshaw. Music played. Amazing Grace. It was deeply personal, showing photos I hadn't seen in decades. "She didn't just plan your funeral," Sinclair observed. "She curated your life, too." "She needed control," I said, my voice cutting. "She needed to make sure her version of me, the beloved matriarch gone too soon, was the only one anyone remembered. She needed to bury the real me." Sinclair stopped the music. "We can submit this as evidence of premeditation." "We will," I agreed, "and we'll make sure Julian sees it again, without the anesthesia." The problem was Julian. He was still the soft spot. He was the one who had to be forced to choose. We had to break his inertia. "Julian's loyalty is her last piece of leverage," I told Sinclair. "When that breaks, the suit collapses." I opened my laptop and typed a short message to Julian. One line of action with a clear cost. "Your wife is challenging my ability to live in my own house. I am defending myself." I hit send. The response came from Sinclair 2 hours later. "Not Julian. Veronica's lawyer is demanding an immediate mediation regarding the assets," Sinclair said, urgency in her tone. "It's a bluff. They want to scare you into backing down before the competency hearing." This was a deadline, a micro clock on my safety. "Decline the mediation," I ordered. I would not meet them across a table. "Tell them they've already had their hearing. It was held in my hospital room." My image was flashing on the screen, gone too soon, but Veronica's plan was about to crash harder than she realized. Julian's silence was heavy. He hadn't replied to my message. He was stuck, caught between a wife who saw me as an asset and a mother who saw him as a disappointment. 2 days before the competency hearing, a package arrived. It wasn't legal. It was a worn photo album addressed in Julian's handwriting. Inside were pictures of us, me, him, his father. The edges were softened by handling. On the last page was a handwritten note from Julian, short and jagged. "She told me you didn't trust me. She told me you thought I ruined your life." This was the microcost, The revealed flaw. Veronica hadn't just lied about my health. She'd twisted the core of my relationship with my son. She had seeded this betrayal for years, building a scaffold of resentment. Sinclair confirmed the move. Veronica was actively trying to enlist Noah in her defense, painting me as a bitter, unstable old woman who was cutting off Julian to spite him. She was leveraging Noah's fear of losing his inheritance. She called the shelter's director, Sinclair reported. Said you were prone to fits of irrational generosity. It's a smear campaign. This was the final escalation before the courtroom, turning family against family. I couldn't allow Noah to be pulled into their toxic center. I texted Noah, "Hold the line. Your dad is lost right now. Don't go with either of us." He replied instantly, "I won't, Grandma. I saw the emails. I know the truth." This was the confirmation I needed. Noah was my boundary, my protection. I decided to force the separation. Julian needed a consequence he couldn't blame on Veronica. I called Julian directly. The phone rang 3 times. "Mama?" His voice was thin. "I got your photos, Julian," I said. My voice didn't cut. It was just steady, flat. "Did you really believe I thought you ruined my life?" There was a long silence on the line. I heard him exhale, a sound of profound defeat. "She twisted it," he finally said. "She said you told her I was ungrateful, that you wished you had moved away when Dad died." "I told her," I cut in. My truth was simple. I told her when you were 13 and cried because you didn't have new shoes for school. You said, 'I didn't give you everything, but I gave you what I had, and I'd do it again barefoot if I had to.'" Another silence. Then a sharp, ragged sound, like paper tearing. I heard the tremor in his voice. "I filed, Mama," he whispered. "The papers. I filed the divorce this morning." My stomach dropped. I hadn't expected this kind of decisive action from him. I had forced a move, but the price was steeper than I'd intended. "After Simone showed us the recordings," he continued, urgency building, "after I saw that awful slideshow, I knew it had gone too far, but I also knew it had been going on longer than I wanted to admit. She's been talking bad about you for years. Every little thing you said," she twisted. Twisted. That was Veronica's power. She took my love and turned it into his shame. "I've been a fool," he said. "I didn't offer comfort. Not yet." "You believed all of it, Julian," I said. "Every word from a woman who never once asked me how I was feeling. You looked at your mother and didn't think to ask if any of it made sense. You didn't fight for me, Julian. You just stepped aside and let her start digging." My pain converted directly into action. I hung up. The click of the line was a decisive action. He filed the papers and walked away, and the terrible quiet that followed was the sound of my family dividing forever. The divorce filing immediately flipped the pressure. The competency hearing, scheduled for the following Thursday, became moot. Veronica no longer had Julian's name, money, or the appearance of a unified front to leverage. The hearing was postponed. Veronica's lawyer sent a terse email agreeing to drop the competency challenge if I promised not to pursue the elder abuse felony charges. I had won the legal battle, but it felt hollow. The silence in the house was too loud. The following Sunday, Julian came back alone. He wore the old gray suit, now hanging looser on him. He rang the bell once, then waited. I watched him from the kitchen window. He stood there, still and heavy, like a boy who knew his mama had every right to shut the door in his face. I opened it. I didn't say a word. I just looked at him. "Mama," he said, "can I talk to you?" I stepped aside. He sat at the kitchen table, hunching over his hands as if he didn't trust them not to tremble. The silence was the focus. "I didn't know," he said softly. "Not really. I thought you were tired. That maybe Veronica was right. that you needed help. I stayed standing, letting the quiet do the heavy lifting. She told me things, he continued, said you were confused, said you'd been calling her the wrong name. I believed her, and I didn't check for myself. He pulled something from his pocket, a printed email. He slid it across the table. She wrote this the day after you fainted, told the funeral home to confirm our deposit. I didn't touch the paper. I didn't need to. She even suggested you told her once you didn't want to live hooked up to machines. His voice broke, and my jaw clenched. You believed all of it, I said. Every word from a woman who rearranged my house while I was still breathing. A woman who tried to erase me before I'd even been discharged. He dropped his gaze. I let her get in my head. I let her convince me I was being merciful. He swallowed hard. I've been a fool. I walked over to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. My hands didn't shake. You know what hurts the most? I said. It's not the lies. It's that you didn't recognize me anymore. You looked at your mother and didn't fight for me, Julian. You just stepped aside and let her start digging. He wiped his eyes. I'm sorry, Mama. I am. And I know sorry isn't enough. It wasn't. But it was a voluntary confession, an action with visible cost. Before he left, he pulled another folder from his pocket, not legal papers this time. Inside were photos, real ones, of him and Noah at the park. He laid them on the coffee table one by one. I've been seeing a counselor, he said. It was Noah's idea. And what did you find in those boxes? I asked. I found her voice still ringing in my head, he said. And I found out how easy it is to believe the wrong voice when the right one gets quiet. The tears came freely then. He dropped to his knees on the floor in front of me. I lost my marriage, he said, but that doesn't compare to almost losing you. I looked at him long and slow. I didn't say anything. I just reached out and placed my hand gently on his head. Not to forgive, not to fix, but to remind him what a mother's touch feels like after all the noise has faded. He knelt on the floor like a boy begging not to be punished, but the punishment was already a quiet, bitter truth. Julian stayed there for a moment, quiet and still, under my hand. Then Noah entered the room. He didn't say anything either. He just walked over and wrapped his arms around both of us. He held me like he had in the hospital. But now we were above it, all of us breathing again. That's when I knew love doesn't always roar when it returns. Sometimes it just rests its head in your lap and stays quiet. When Julian left that evening, he didn't ask if he was back in the will. He just kissed my forehead and walked away, like a man trying to earn back the right to be called son. The days moved slower after that. Noah came by every day after school. He'd do his homework at the dining table. He never asked for anything. Sinclair kept me updated. Veronica's name had been taken off every document. The house was mine. The secondary trust for Noah was secured. My updated will, leaving the bulk of my estate to the women's shelter, had been filed and certified. There were no loopholes left to crawl through. Everything that mattered was finally protected. The slideshow box still sat untouched in the hallway closet. I thought about tossing it out, but part of me kept it as a reminder. Not of what they did, but of how close I came to being erased. That slideshow had my life in it, and I deserved to decide how that story ended. Julian didn't return for a long time. Then came the call. Mama, can I come see you? I paused, and then I said yes. He arrived looking thinner in spirit. He had another folder. He laid the photos on the coffee table one by one. I found out how easy it is to believe the wrong voice when the right one gets quiet, he repeated. I didn't offer comfort or forgiveness. I just reached out and placed my hand gently on his head. It was enough. I sat on the porch after he left, wrapped in my shawl. I glanced toward the garden where new buds were beginning to bloom. Red ones, the kind his daddy used to plant. People ask me sometimes if I ever forgave Julian. I don't answer. Forgiveness isn't something you shout into the air. It's something you plant. And if it grows in silence. But inside me, in that quiet place only a mother knows, I still love my son. Even after everything, I'm still breathing. And some things, some people, are worth loving even after they forget how to love you back. I sat on the porch swing, the air softer now, waiting for the peace I finally knew I had earned. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.